Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Helldivers 2. Today I want to do a little bit of discussion talking about Helldivers 2 and the future of how it could possibly expand. Now don't get me wrong, Helldivers 2 is probably one of my favorite games to come out within the last few years. I've put a lot of time into it and it is one of the most fun games to play either by myself or with my friends, but I do still think it could get better as every game could, and I think that there are a couple of easy and interesting ways that it could, so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Keep in mind, I am by no means a video game development expert and I don't know how easy or difficult some of the stuff might be, but I just kind of want to go through and talk about my ideas in terms of general ways that the game could get better, in terms of ways that the economy might get better, and some ways that the gameplay could possibly stand to get better as well. I might bounce back and forth between a couple of different points, so bear with me on that, but I will try to keep everything as concise as I possibly can. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. So first, talking about ways that Helldivers 2 could become even better than it is now, at least in a general sense. Number one, hitting the lowest hanging fruit on the planet is to just make the game available to everybody again. I don't know why that's still something that is a big issue for them to do. If you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, or if you have not been following it, basically a while back, shortly after the game first came out, they did this thing where they were going to roll out a requirement for you to have to sign into PlayStation Network, which wasn't really going to do very well because a lot of people around the world literally can't sign into PlayStation Network because of where they live. And even the people who could did not want to because PlayStation Network is not necessarily the most trustworthy thing in the world. So they essentially rolled it back and said, we aren't going to be doing this. You don't have to log into PSN. At the same time, they also made it so that way Helldivers 2 is unavailable to purchase in essentially about half of the world at this point in time. I think it's like over 170 countries or something. And slowly they have been rolling it back to where more and more people have been able to purchase it. But at this point, just make it so that way everybody can play. I don't know why this is such a big issue. I don't know. I imagine this is a Sony decision. I don't think this is an Arrowhead decision, but I could be wrong about that. It just doesn't make any sense. It is the stupidest thing in the world. Please just make it available for everybody. You literally have a game about a united Super Earth, and we don't have a united Earth helping us. With that out of the way, another thing that I think could make it a lot better, and I know this is probably never going to happen, but release the game on Xbox or the Microsoft Store or something. I think that it is a phenomenal idea to do that. I know it's probably not going to happen because it is Sony, but I think that the benefits of what could possibly come from this far outweigh the rivalry between the two companies in so many different ways. You would have basically double the amount of players on your game as well because the number of Xbox players are just absolutely up there. And if you do that, that opens the door for so many other crossover events or so many other promotional stuff that you can do. We only had one crossover event right now with the Killzone 2 crossover, which makes sense because that's a Sony-made product. But imagine if we had like a Halo crossover or anything else that's Microsoft owned. There's so many different things that they could do if they open up the gate to Xbox players that it is just astronomical. But I know that that's probably never going to happen and that's wishful thinking, but I can dream. And now getting into more practical or I guess grounded type stuff instead of just hoping that they release the game to everybody and hoping they release it on other systems. I want to talk a little bit more about the economy of the game, at least in a certain extent, specifically talking about the war bonds and the Superstore, because I have a couple of thoughts about that I think could be better in regards to how the Superstore and how war bonds are handled. Number one is, personally, this might just be me, but I feel as though the quality of the war bonds has gone down a little bit since the game first released. We've had several war bonds since then, and they have had a variety of different things, but I do feel as though the overall either quality or amount of stuff that we have gotten from war bonds has been trickling down ever so slightly. Now, don't get me wrong, they are still nailing it in terms of the themes of all of the war bonds that they're coming out with. Every one of them has a very nice theme around them. They have very cool stuff that's included, but I think that in terms of the amount of stuff that we are getting, and in some cases, the types of stuff that we're getting are a little bit questionable. If we look back at one of the first war bonds that they came out with, I'm going to use Polar Patriots as an example because that's personally one of my favorite war bonds because it includes my favorite weapon, the Tenderizer. If you look at the Polar Patriots war bond and you look at all the stuff that we got from it, we got 3 primary weapons, a secondary weapon, a booster, a grenade, 3 different armor sets, and a bunch of other cosmetic stuff. I'm not really going to be counting the cosmetic stuff like the capes and the backgrounds and the emotes because that's all just flair, but like the armors that actually have passives that we can use, the weapons and stuff, that's all practical stuff. And we got a lot of stuff with that particular war bond. And if you compare that to one of the more recent ones that came out, for example, I'm going to use the Servants of Freedom one just because that's the most recent one in my mind because I just got that one. If you look at what we got with that one, it's clearly not the same level of stuff that we got. We only got 2 armor sets, both of which I believe are light, if I'm not mistaken. I don't even think there's a variety of them. We only got 1 primary weapon, 1 secondary weapon, 1 throwable, and we have a stratagem, which that's a whole nother thing, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But you can see there's definitely not nearly as much actual content in this one as there is in some of the earlier warbots. It's still cool. The stuff that we're getting is really nice. The fact that we have like basically a rocket pistol, a seeker drone, grenade, and armor that gives us martyrdom is incredibly awesome. But it's just the fact that these warbonds are not going down in price, but they are going down in quantity of what we are getting, if that makes any sense. Again, I still think that the stuff that we're getting for these warbonds is very on theme and very awesome. Like, for example, at the time of making this video, the most recent one that we got, Borderline Justice, is basically just a cowboy lover's dream. It is very flavorful. You got the Winchester rifle, you got the laser revolver, you got the really cool armor set. Like, it's very on theme and they know what they're doing. I do think, however, it could be improved upon more if we get back to what warbonds used to give us, which was just, in my opinion, a lot more content. Now, sure, you can make the argument that they are trying to avoid a lot of weapon bloat, a lot of equipment bloat, a lot of armor bloat, which is completely understandable. You don't want to have too many weapons and too many things in your game, because then you're just going to come into a situation where certain things are just going to be better than other things, which we're kind of already getting to that point. But especially in a game like Helldivers 2, where the build crafting and the build variety is kind of the whole thing, and where they are updating weapons and equipment relatively often with patches and whatnot, I feel like you can still have a lot of stuff and still be able to let people do what they want to do. And then another point going off of that is I think we need more regular free warbonds. Right now, we only have 1 free warbond, which is the Helldivers Mobilized, which is the default one that everybody has access to. And while still to this day, that warbond has some of the best stuff in the game, it has some of the best boosters, it has basically all the weapons that you would need, at least on a base level. It's got some good equipment, some great weapons. Like, it is still probably one of the best warbonds in the game, even though it's the free one that everybody has. But I think we need more, not super often. I don't think we need a free warbond like to come out with every single warbond that comes out, but maybe like once a year, once every like 6 months or so, like just somewhere along the lines, give us a free one every so often, just so that way the people who are purely free to play or don't play enough to be able to grind out super credits, they can still have something to work towards, they can still have something to do, and they have more tools that they can work with and more toys that they can play with. Because at the end of the day, that's basically what you are grinding for when you're playing this game. If you have most of the stuff that you're working towards and you don't really have anything to push you to play, you're not going to be playing a whole lot, at least in most cases. If you are just having fun playing with what you have, that's a different story. But in a lot of cases, for a lot of players, this is essentially what it is. If a new warbond comes out that they're not crazy about, they're like, I'll skip, I'll come back later. But if it's free and it's like, well, I might as well go for it because it's free and I can just get it even if I'm not going to use it, then that gives people more incentive to play, which gives them more incentive to do all the other things that you want them to do, like spend money. Again, I don't think it should be something that happens all the time. I don't think it should be, maybe not as big as the Helldivers Mobilized one, because that one was 10 pages worth of stuff. Maybe even 5 or 6 page free warbond every now and then might not be a bad idea, but I just think it's something that they should implement maybe once a year or so, just to give players something new to work towards. And then the last thing I want to talk about in terms of warbonds is I personally am not crazy about the fact that they have been putting stratagems behind warbonds. I know super credits are not the hardest thing in the world to grind. I know it's much better than a lot of other games in terms of premium currency, but still, I don't know how I personally feel about the fact that stratagems, which in my personal opinion are really what set Helldivers 2 apart from a lot of other build crafting games, are linked behind specific warbonds. As of right now, there are 7 stratagems that are currently linked behind warbonds. Now, the thing about these particular stratagems is a lot of them are more or less kind of niche. They're not like the most insane thing in the world, and they're kind of just there for like the funny moments, like the portable hell bomb, which isn't really a practical thing, but it's just incredibly funny, or the hover pack, which can be very nice, but in most situations you really don't need it. But then there are really good ones that are actually very effective, such as the anti-tank emplacement or the flame sentry, which are both really, really good stratagems, or even the directional shield are all really good. So the fact that there are certain players that just don't have access to these stratagems because they haven't shelled out the money for it is, I don't necessarily know how I personally feel about that mindset. I think that there are ways that you can include stratagems into warbonds, which I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but overall, I don't necessarily know how I feel personally about it. Maybe it might just be me. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think stratagems and war bonds are a good thing, maybe I might just be going a little bit too crazy on this, but let me know down below. And then after all the talking about war bonds, the next thing I want to talk about is the Superstore, because I think the Superstore has gotten better, but I do still think it could be a little bit more mindful of it, at least a lot of the stuff going on in terms of players. First things first is it is starting to get a little bit stale. We're seeing the same things all the time on the Superstore. It's at a point now where it's actually on a rotation, and if you go on to the Helldivers 2 wiki, you can literally see the rotation as to what's going to be live when. And there's some good stuff, but it's also a case of people at this point in time, if anybody has been playing the game for a while, they know what they want from the Superstore, and they're probably not going to get anything else. Now, granted, they did do a really good change recently where they actually added multiple pages to the Superstore, which I actually appreciate a lot, because it makes it so that we would just have more variety of things that we could find. But again, it's the same thing where most of the stuff people have seen 1,000 times, and if they aren't going to get it the first time, chances are they're probably not going to get it the 4th, 5th, or 6th time it comes around. And I think something that they can really add to the Superstore that can help alleviate both the boringness of it as well as some of the stuff I talked about with war bonds is make one of the pages of the Superstore include selected individual items from premium war bonds. Random items selected from war bonds, and they can be from different ones that you can just buy individually, because for a lot of players, that's the case where they really only want to get a premium war bond for 1, 2, or 3 things. And they don't want to shell out $10 for a premium war bond that they only really want to get for something. For example, for me personally, the Chemical Agents war bond, I only want the stim pistol. Out of everything in that entire war bond, the only thing that I personally want is the stim pistol. And I'm not going to spend $10 on a war bond just for one pistol that I want to use for a niche medic build. But if the stim pistol itself was available in the Superstore individually for $5 or so, I'd be much more likely and inclined to do that. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of people. You could put individual items from randomly selected war bonds onto the Superstore. That way people can get just the things that they want, or at the very least be hopeful that the stuff that they do want shows up on the Superstore. And you could pull from different ones. Like I said, you can put the armor sets from Viper Commandos on there, and you could also put one of the weapons from the Freedom's Flame Warbond on there, and then you could also put a piece of equipment from Truth Enforcers. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff. It basically just could be a random selection of different stuff from the premium warbonds that you don't have to buy the whole thing just to get. And if they wanted to do something like that, I think what would be very important is that they also have one of the stratagems from the premium warbonds constantly rotating as well, because again, that's something that players really love to use, and it's something that people really don't like, the fact that they might have to shell out $10 for a stratagem. Whereas if it's available in the Superstore for say like $5 on its own, people might actually be more inclined to do that. Again, I think just giving players more options to get stuff for cheaper or less input is always a good thing, because then you are going to be incentivizing players to do stuff. It also, and I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing to point out, but it makes it better for people who are bad with impulse purchases, myself included. If you have a warbond that is not going to be leaving the store, that you know is going to be there, people are going to be less incentivized to get it because they know that they can just grind for it later. Whereas if you put something individual on the Superstore that they might be wanting to get, and you say, hey, this is only going to be up for a limited time, and we don't know when it's going to rotate back around, it could go through a whole cycle, and you might have to wait like a week and a half before it shows up again. That makes players go, huh, maybe I should get this now before it goes away. It's cheaper than if I get the full-blown warbond. You see where I'm going with this? It's much easier for people to make impulsive decisions when it's just an individual item, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's basically just giving players other opportunities to get stuff aside from just having to shell out full money. But that was a lot I talked about in terms of the economy, the warbonds, Superstore, so I kind of want to shift away from that and talk about more gameplay stuff. But let me know down below what you guys thought about all that kind of stuff. Did I have a bunch of stupid ideas? Let me know down below. But now going into the actual gameplay side of things, the first thing I want to see added, and I feel like a lot of people are on the same boat with this, is we want to see more Illuminate. The Illuminate were added a while ago, and they were added more or less pretty well. They are a lot of fun to go up against, and they were obviously a nice addition to the standard enemy pool that we see in the game. But I feel like everybody's at the kind of the point now where we have fought against them a bunch of times. The missions are relatively the same, and we kind of just want to see more being included in with the Illuminate, especially considering considering just how much of a threat they were in the first game, people really want to see more Illuminate enemies show up in the game. And I think part of that comes from the fact that when the Illuminate first attacked, it was just a scouting mission, i.e. that means Arrowhead just kind of put them in because they wanted to give something to the players, even though they didn't have them fully fleshed out yet. And when the main force gets here, i.e. Arrowhead finishes fully fleshing them out and gives us more units, then we're going to get the full brunt of the Illuminate forces. So I think that that's going to happen. It's just a case of I wish it would happen sooner rather than later. And also another thing I think they definitely should add back into the game, because this was a feature in the first game, is weapon attachments or weapon modifications. This was a thing in the first game. You could actually put mods and attachments on your weapons to change the way that they function, give them a little bit more ammo or accuracy, you know, the standard stuff that attachments do. And that isn't really a factor in this game yet. And I think that that would be really nice, especially going back to what we were talking about before with the fear of having too many weapons and having weapon bloat. I think that if you give us the ability to customize and personalize our weapons with different stats, different attachments and whatnot, that could kind of help alleviate some of those issues, because you kind of do both. You allow us to have a bunch of weapons and also be able to improve the ones that we currently have. How they would handle the attachments, I have absolutely no idea, but I think that that would be something worth adding. And then talking about armor, there's a couple of things that I think armor could do with a little bit of improvement. Number one is reworking some of the armor passives. I did a whole video talking about armor passives and which ones I think are the best and the worst. Granted, it's a little bit older now because there's a couple of armor passives that have been released since then, but I think some of them could be reworked, especially some of the ones that are meant to be more practical. The ones that are memes or the ones that are just kind of there for fun, like the integrated explosives one where you just explode after a couple seconds of dying, I think that's fine because that's more or less just a funny one. But other ones like advanced filtration, which don't really see a whole lot of work, even though the fact that we now have more gas stratagems and there's a couple more gas type enemies to work with, we still don't see a whole lot of that one going around. So overall improvements and buffs to some of the armor passives I think could be really useful. And then lastly, talking about armor customization, I know people have been wanting the ability to change the color of their armor, or at least just dye it. I don't know if that necessarily is a good thing to add, because you do kind of want to stay on theme of the Helldivers lore to a degree, but I think a way that you can do it that kind of meets in the middle is one of two different options, or you could do both of these. The first thing is to add armor swatches, not necessarily give them the ability to change the color of their armor, but have a few different color pattern sets of each individual armor that you could swap between that fit the theme of whatever it is, the armor that you currently have, but still giving the player autonomy to be like, ooh, I like this color combination a little bit better, or oh, this one looks a little bit nicer. You could also have them stay on theme as to where the particular armor came from, so that way they still have that sort of identity. For example, the armors from the Truth Enforcer Warbond have a lot of blacks, whites, and reds in them. A good example of this is the UF50 Bloodhound armor. Really cool, way too red for my personal likings. I like red, not that much red. A buddy of mine would love this, but I am not that big on the red. But if you want this but don't want it to be so loud, you could have maybe a couple of different swatches where it's, you know, the pure red like it is here, or you could have one where it's more black with some red highlights or some red accents, or another one where it's more white with some red or white with some black. And you know what I mean? Like, try to have some color combinations that fit within the confines of where the particular armor came from, and still preserve the overall color scheme that you want, but still give the players the ability to customize. And even further on top of that, something that they could do for the helmets, especially this would be really nice for the helmets, is give them armor matching. Make it so that way, regardless of what helmet you have the ability to toggle something where it matches the current color of your armor, the current color swatch of your armor. Because there are so many cool helmets that I want to run, but the fact that the colors just don't work with really any but a couple of different pieces of armor just really irks me. And I think something very simple like that could help out a lot, because the helmets and the capes especially are just purely cosmetic. They don't have any stats or anything linked to them. So I feel like you could do something like that and it won't really change a whole lot. And I think that that would help players a lot in terms of getting the perfect color or image setup that they really want. And that is roughly everything that I think could be added in or changed about Helldivers 2 that could make it a little bit better. Again, I love this game. I think it's phenomenal. I do think that it could still be better though, and I want to voice my personal opinions as to how it could be. Does any of the stuff I said make sense, or do you guys have other ideas that you think the game could be better? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, I hope you found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button, and consider becoming a member and subscribing today. For Super with Helldivers, I will see you in the next video.